and welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Wednesday, August 30th, 2023. I'm Brad Eli, here with my two co-hosts, Christine Niles and Trey Brock. Catholic seminaries, they're the schools where young men go to study theology and pursue a vocation to the priesthood. We've reported on many sex scandals at seminaries, largely involving homosexual predation. There's also major issues with the way the curriculum is structured at so many seminaries. But what are some solutions to all this? Well, we'll get into all that later on in the show, but to start things off, we'll be talking with one of our reporters and a former seminary, Dr. William Mahoney, about a recent article spun up by Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, saying there should be fewer seminaries in the United States. Dr. Mahoney, tell us more about what Dolan's saying.
Hi, Brad. In a nutshell, he wrote an article which is published in America Magazine, the Jesuit magazine, and he's saying that there are lots of seminaries in the United States, and they're all good, according to him, but there should be fewer ones that are just excellent. His reason is that he doesn't think it makes sense anymore to have each diocese with its own seminary. So bishops are already practicing sending seminarians to out-of-state seminaries. The reasons he gives are financial constraints and staffing problems. So that's his solution, is to have fewer seminaries that are excellent rather than a lot of seminaries he believes are good.
Okay, so are you buying what he's saying? Just gut feeling, personal reaction, no right or wrong. Just, do you personally believe it's all about the money?
Well, I do believe it's all about the money, yes. I don't think his reasons are very good at all, and he's really going against traditions of the church. I mean, it's the seminary system, as you know, really started with Trent. Prior to that, you did an apprenticeship with a priest. You follow a priest around or something, which is absolutely the better model, in my opinion. It was a necessary thing, the seminary, because of the Protestant Revolution. Okay, so that's the way it is now. It's fine. It's a fine system if it's done properly. But the bishop is supposed to oversee the entire thing. Ultimately, the seminary only recommends an individual for orders, but it's up to the bishop. Remember, St. Paul says to Timothy, lay hands on no man lightly. That's his responsibility. So if a bad guy gets through the cracks, you're not supposed to ordain him. So the bishop should be really should be close to his seminarians and know what's going on. To send them out of state is just kind of like, oh yeah, bring them back to me, write a recommendation, whatever. It really just makes it more of a business than what it really is, which is a vocation.
Well, they used to have so many seminaries, like hundreds of seminaries. Everybody had their own little seminary. All the houses of formation, religious houses, all the seminary, all the diocesan, at the diocesan level. There were just hundreds of seminaries in this country like prior to 1970. And now it's just down to fewer and fewer, and now they want to have even less seminaries. You'd think the old model, priests would be closer to their bishop and bishops would be closer to their priests.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes a lot more sense. I mean, the priest is an extension of the bishop. He's the supreme priest in the diocese, and the priests act as an extension of him to do all the, to minister to all the people in the diocese. So you would think he'd want to be really close to them. The head should be close to the members of his body, and so on and so forth. When you read about the first bishop of Philadelphia, for example, John Newman, I mean, he literally died in the street because all he did was work. He was always running around, seeing his priests, seeing laity, doing the work of a priest. And he died in the street from exhaustion, from doing that. And that's really what a bishop should be doing,
Trey's got a question for you.
Yeah, William, Cardinal Dolan, he says we would be better off if we had fewer good ones and a smaller number of excellent ones, and you mentioned that earlier. I draw the analogy, and maybe it's not a perfect one, but with the Catholic school system where, yeah, if there are lukewarm or watered down, a bunch of watered down Catholic schools, it'd be better if they didn't exist, and if there were really good, a smaller number of very good ones. On the surface, it seems as if it kind of makes a little bit of sense, but obviously if excellent ones doesn't mean orthodoxy, then obviously it doesn't make sense. I guess on the surface, just the question of having fewer, if there were fewer very solid orthodox seminaries versus a bunch of watered down ones, do you think that holds a little bit of weight?
Yes, I kind of hear two questions here. One is that true at face value? Of course, but see, that's the beauty of what he's saying. He's saying it on such a general and superficial level that it could be interpreted that way, which would be correct. But he doesn't define his terms or go deeper. So what does he mean by that? Yes, of course, a few more excellent things is better than a bunch of mediocre ones. But remember, he also says the ones that are all there are good. He just wants excellent. I mean, that's just... What do you mean by that? He doesn't really define his terms.
And then, this strikes me, William, as just trying to put a positive spin on essentially we've got to close this down because we don't have the money and we don't have the staff. It reminds me a little bit of some of the words he was using a few years ago in his archdiocese when they were putting together the Making All Things New campaign. It was a fundraising campaign. They're trying to raise like $200 million to renew and restore parishes, all that stuff. And what they ended up doing really was they ended up shuttering all sorts of parishes while putting a really positive spin on everything. Like, oh, this is going to be great. And it's going to make parish life more vibrant. But really what it came down to was we don't have money and we're losing parishioners and we are having, we don't have enough people to run all these, so we just need to shut this down. I mean, do you think he's just trying to put a positive spin on that with these seminaries?
I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly it. There's a decline. There's not a vocation crisis. There's an ordination crisis. There are plenty of vocations. I was in seminary. There were lots of good men who want to become priests. That's not the problem. The problem is who can get through past the gatekeepers. And so they've created a crisis. It's not a vocation crisis, it's an ordination crisis. And because of that, and because of their guys like James Martin getting off the hook and other good guys like Father Kalchik getting punished, you've created a situation where the numbers are dwindling. And so now to put a positive spin on it, like is to try to say, oh no, this is good because really we just want some excellent ones instead of a bunch of just good ones. So yeah, that's exactly what he's doing. He's putting a positive spin on a mess that they created.
All right, well, thank you very much, Dr. Mahoney, and we'll be talking with you soon.
Thank you.
So there is a decline, there is a financial crunch, there is a need to downsize on the parish level, seminary structures and all that, we get that. But a phenomenon that's kind of being paralleled here, and I'd like to bring this out, is the fact that on the diocesan level, while they're shuttering parishes, they're also making fewer and fewer. I was talking with one priest from Chicago very recently, and he was talking about that there's very few pastors now. There's a lot of parochial vicars. Each one of these guys had their own parish, and now they're taking a lot of these good guys and putting them underneath a yes man, and he has to approve their homilies and give them direction and give them to, they're no longer a pastor level. So you're actually using the decline, personnel as policy, to get more control, like in the area of supage. Only the supage yes men are pastors, and all these other good priests who formerly were pastors find themselves without a pastorship and are answering to some of these cronies under there. And I would like to draw the same parallel here with these seminaries, because it's interesting that in March, Pope Francis was talking about closing Italian parishes, Italian seminaries, and we need to downsize the number of seminaries. And he's also talking about reshaping how seminarians are formed. So and all of this, we'll get into that a little bit later, but in all of this there's this idea that as you're downsizing, as you're selecting which one of these seminaries to close, you're probably going to close maybe some of those that are a little more Catholic, you might say, and the ones who are a little more with it, who are going to smell like the sheep and go to the peripheries and be formed in the image and likeness of Francis, they're going to stay open. They're the ones that are actually going to implement more of this, I would need a discerning priest, a priest who's, a servant and not the, priest, prophet, and king of the old ilk of priesthood. So I see a little bit of that coming along the way.
Well, you mentioned this model of priests no longer being pastors and in charge of their parish, but rather more administrators with someone over them controlling what they're doing. That's what they have implemented here in the Archdiocese of Detroit. I actually did a special report on it called Detroit Money Grab, and I encourage people to go watch that. But so many priests, there was kind of an uprising here because they were so upset about the outright violation of their canonical rights through this program where they're, like you said, parochial vicars or whatever, they're administrators, and their finances are handled by somebody else, usually a lay person working in the chancery somewhere. Their homilies are, and the music, all that stuff, that's actually now overseen by lay staffers rather than the parish priest himself. And so they were feeling very much like, I have no control over what's going on here. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And what's interesting is it had an effect on the seminary here. It had an effect on the vocations here. I heard from insiders who said they actually lost seminarians because of this program. Seminarians actually left because they're like, I don't want to be a priest in this archdiocese if that's how I'm going to be treated. So yeah, but just moving towards as far as seminary formation and that sort of thing, what's happened to seminaries, for a really good summary into what happened to seminaries, a very good book, very well known, by Michael Voris, Goodbye Good Men. It goes into how seminaries were infiltrated, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and how the really strong Orthodox Catholics were essentially driven out in favor of the more liberal, unfortunately, homosexual, seminarians who were promoted and then put in these parishes, and it's kind of led to the mess that we have today.
Yeah, it reminds me of the whole idea of a priest having to have his homily checked by whoever. It reminds me of a lot of the Catholic school teachers, not just in Michigan, but around the country, who, they essentially get fired. And we have two that I know of working with us here at Church Militant, who they're just speaking the truth, and obviously they're being Catholic and they're being Orthodox and whatnot, and because they didn't get the rubber stamp from somebody above them who doesn't really care too much about the faith, they're the ones, that teacher is the one that gets kind of pushed away. But it reminds me a little bit of that. But it's certainly a problem when it's the substance of what you're talking about. It's Catholic, it's Orthodox. There's no problem with theology there. It's actually very sound. It's just a little bit not politically correct or whatever it is today, and then they get pushed out for that. So
we have two themes going on here. We have money and we have control. We have money on the diocesan level and in the seminary level. You can't argue the fact that, there's less money, there's less people. I get it. The same reason why they would be shutting things down. But while you're shutting things down, the way you do that, the programs in which you do that, may fall in your favor if you're a control freak. If you really want to control things, like they were talking about Goodbye Good Men and that control that they have, fewer moving parts, easier to control. Having fewer people to control on the diocesan level or in the seminary formation level, it works out in your favor if you're that control freak or working towards some agenda, which, if you read Goodbye Good Men, you'd have to say there was an agenda going on there. De-manifying the priesthood, if you will. Emasculating, having emasculated priests out there. Turning away good men and bringing along the effeminate men along the way. That's kind of what's been going on as the agenda there. Along this lines, in April of 2022, the Vatican approved norms to reshape U.S. priestly formation. The 6th edition for priestly formation got approved, and there was this section in there that propedeutic stage is to focus. This is what they wanted to put in the seminary formation program in the United States. This propedeutic stage is to focus on fostering communion between a seminarian and his bishop and his particular church, to allow for a period of intense vocational discernment and to spend time learning to pray, especially through scriptural reading, the practice of Lectio Divina, and all that in this document that was provided for that. That was in April 2022. There's been a push and pull since 2019 on priestly formation in America. Actually, it's been going back earlier, but Rome wants these men to be formed in a year of just come and see. No real intellectual formation, no real just intense spiritual formation, just come and see and discernment and all that. Well, the bishops don't want that over here. They want you to be actually getting positive put in formation during that year and actually be worked with. And Rome's like, no, just kind of let them be for a year. Well, how does that work with deferral of payments where you're accredited, you're studying from abroad, your visas, foreign visas. There was many reasons why, technical reasons why the bishops were pushing back against this. Well, finally got stiff-armed in. But let me just read a follow-up from this, from Francis, November of that year. He started talking about seminarians they're not servants, they're servants, not supermen. The mission of a seminary is not to form supermen who pretend to know and control everything. Excuse me. But today, he said, much more personal attention is needed because, here we are, the scarlet R, rigid formation schemes, train rigid priests, which is not what the church needs. There's more on all that. But he's actually saying you need to have less rigid priests, meaning they're out there with their theology, they're out there with their virtue, they're out there leading by example, they're out there actually instructing, priest, prophet, and king, which is what we traditionally wanted in a priest. You didn't want someone just a glorified social worker, which is what priests and religious have become since the late 60s. Glorified social workers is what this hippie formation is going back towards. And there was pushback. So there is control in all this, and who's going to implement these programs and to what degree, and what type of control do we have, and what type of men are going to get green lighted, and what type of men are going to be, given the heave-ho. All of that up for grabs when Dolan says, well, there are some good ones out there, but we want excellent ones that answer to Rome and say, yes, we have men who smell like the sheep, who are not supermen. Those are the type of guys you want. That's the type of guys we're putting out.
Well, yeah, and I mean, just to be fair to, with regard to the Pope's words there, as you've spoken about before, there has been a real concern about clericalism in the church. And we see it sometimes in certain communities, especially more in traditional communities where the priest is given so much deference that he's almost worshipped. He's treated as semi-divine. He can never be questioned. And then, of course, you see that's kind of a breeding ground for abuse, all sorts of abuse, spiritual abuse, sex abuse, as I've exposed in some of my investigations. And it's actually a harmful attitude that some laity still have towards priests. And so I think partly, not entirely, but I think partly Pope Francis does have that in mind, and it is a legitimate concern. And we do need priests who have the smell of the sheep in the sense that they truly are ministering to the people. They're not like way up here and you're down here. They are with their people. They're suffering with they're ministering to them. So in that sense, that is legitimate. But just going back to some of the problems that we've covered a lot in seminaries, like the gay seminary pipeline that we had coming up from Columbia to East Coast seminaries, and then we have our own priest here in Detroit, Father Perone. He was actually named in the Goodbye Good Men. He was a whistleblower priest here in Detroit who exposed seminarians who were actually being shown pornography for their moral theology course. It was absolutely scandalous, and this was actually taken to the Pope. The Pope, pulled Bishop Untner over there and pretty much lambasted him over it, and then the seminary ended up being closed down. And we should clarify, too, that Pope John Paul II did try to clean up seminaries. He did have a visitation of the seminaries here in America to try to clean them up. And what's interesting is Father Joseph Marino, who was the Buffalo priest, who I think was rubbed out as a whistleblower. He wrote a book about his time at Christ the King Seminary in Buffalo, and how he said it was just homosexual. Everything. Like, he was constantly getting hit on. It was horrible. But then he said Pope John Paul II came in. He tried to clean up all the seminaries, and he said for a while there it was all gone. Like, it was all complete. It was just gone from there. Now it seems to have come back a little bit under some very, shady characters like Father Joseph Gatto. But we still have a very, very long way to go with regard to cleaning up our seminaries today.
And I've never heard that quote before, but I do think that's a response to, like you were talking about, and we've talked about on the download before. I do think that's a response to clericalism, and I actually think the quote is pretty solid. But yeah, to your point, Christine, and I think you're exactly right. I think that not just the sex abuse in seminaries and in churches or all around the world, and homosexual sexual abuse, that's a bad fruit, a rotten fruit of clericalism. The priests thinking that they can just do whatever they want, and everybody else, all the laymen, just kind of not blinking an eye when things are a little bit off. So I think your analysis of that is absolutely correct. But I think the reason that Pope Francis quote is pretty solid is because a priest, in general, is a baptized, he's a member of the body of Christ. He's a baptized Christian who has the ability to confect the sacraments. That's what he is. And so that doesn't mean by any means that, the layman just sits around and just does nothing and waits to be, administered unto, and then just, lives his life like no different than everybody else. So I don't know. I've never heard the quote before, but it sounds pretty solid to me. Brad, I think you can give some pushback for my endorsement of that quote. But yeah.
Yeah, being in the seminary, and also William was in the seminary before, and Voris was in the seminary before, what we found in there was not macho men who were actually being, just standing up and flexing their muscles. And the seminary was really grind out of you any type of machismo, if there was any there. What they're actually doing is continually, and had for decades now, have been extracting the backbone from men. There's been so much sociology, so much psychology in formation instead of theology and faith and morals, canon law. The whole way in which you speak and your tone and your tenor and all of this for years has been just grinded away, that you really don't get a man who stands up on the pulpit and proclaims loudly the church is the one true church and salvation, and mentions hell or mortal sin or any of that. He wouldn't dare do any of that or hurt anybody's feelings. Is the biggest cardinal sin you could make up there. If you talked about contraception or abortion or homosexuality, you just do not find a priest in America who stands up on the pulpit and says any of that. And if he did, the bishop would yank him like tomorrow. So I do get the idea that, but I really think the clericalism in America is not the machismo priest that's standing up and saying, getting all this hubris, but actually people like Supage, who you would look at kind of an effeminate character. Well, how is he stand up for clerical? Well, clericalism is this, I don't need to tell you the truth. I don't owe you the truth. Mm-hmm. You are laity, and I'm clerical, and I'm above having to answer your questions. We run into that all over the country. Every time we're trying to report on a subject, on a topic, story, we call up the chancery. Do you think we get an answer from them? They let it go to voicemail. They don't respond. They never clarify. They don't want to talk. We're just, they don't owe you the truth. They don't owe you the dialogue. They don't owe you. So I think there's a misguided sense of clericalism in this country, and those who are clerical are the people at the top who are just directing everything, as if, to shut down all the masses in this country in 1 week, right across the board. I don't ask questions, don't try to find out the facts, you don't need mass, and it's not going to be provided. And you can't have the sacraments, and none of that. In 1 week, boom, across the whole country. To me, that's clericalism.
Yeah. Yeah. Stupid was the one who, very strangely, when he was asked about the whole sex abuse crisis, he blamed clericalism. Instead of homosexuality, he said, it's clericalism. And so we started joking about how priests are like clericalizing each other, and that's the problem with. But anyway, we've talked a lot about the problems, obviously, in priestly formation, but what are some of the solutions? And an excellent person to turn to is always St. Alphonsus Liguori. He's written a wonderful tract called The Dignity of the Priest. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I wish every single seminarian would read it. I wish every single priest would read it. But I just got a few little nuggets from that tract. We've talked about it before in other shows, but one of the things that he emphasizes in one of his chapters is the priest must have a devotion to Our Lady. He must have a devotion to Our Lady. He says, if it is a duty to ask the prayers of the saints, how much more strictly are we bound to invoke the intercession of Mary, whose prayers are more efficacious with God than the prayers of all the other saints? I think we should be extremely cautious about any seminarian or priest who does not have any devotion to Our Lady, because right then I'm just like, I'm not sure I can trust what you say if you do not have a devotion to Our Lady. I was listening to Father Donald Calloway's conversion story, and he said that as a young priest, he consecrated himself to Our Lady, and as he was looking around at seminarians and priests who'd been led astray by various things, he, in a very special way, asked Our Lady to cover him with her mantle and just protect him in his priesthood so that he himself wouldn't be led astray. Of course, he's got a really strong ministry, and he's excellent. His books on the Rosary and on St. Joseph, absolutely excellent, great preacher. So I think for seminarians out there who are preparing for the priesthood, absolutely turn to Our Lady.
Yeah, I would say the rosary is absolutely essential. Sacramentals, such as the round scapular, a little crucifix, St. Benedict's medal, that's your armor, having that out there. Your rosary is your weapon. St. Padre Pio called it that. Maximilian Kolbe called it that. Confession should be a regular thing. If you are, falling in little things, without confession, you're going to be falling in greater things. You're either going up or down. And, this moral formation is like a stream, and as Bishop Sheen said, the only thing that floats downstream is dead. So you will always have to be going against that stream. Little mortifications, absolutely essential. Little mortifications, little time for prayer, examination of conscience night before you go to bed. Especially, what are the sins of omission? Absolutely, sins of omission. Not just did I rob a bank today or anything like that, but what are all the good things I could have done today that didn't, or what things I did that weren't done very well or perfect in that sense. But Trey, you have a lot of insights with regard to the laity stepping up too as well.
Yeah, I would just say that the answer is, I would always draw it back to the answer today in the 21st century would be the domestic church, but the answer for the laity, for anybody, for priest, laity, it's a deepening of your baptismal vocation, a deeper understanding of your baptismal vocation to pursue that universal call to holiness. By virtue of baptism, we belong to Christ. That should give you a lot of confidence, a lot of comfort as well. You belong to Christ by virtue of your baptism. That's it's kind of like it's a little bit overwhelming. But so you don't live based on fear. You're not scared to bring about His kingdom as we're called to do. And I think that. The way that the laity does this is from the Catechism. It belongs to the laity to seek the kingdom of God by engaging in temporal affairs, and that's where I think the domestic church comes in. That really is the foundation of a rightly ordered temporal sphere. Is a flourishing domestic church, a flourishing true Christian social order where you have that patriarchal headship of the husband, who he lives for faith and family, and then together with his wife, you are raising future saints. Be that a priest or be that a father, future father of a family, or a mother, whatever it may be. So I think that the temporal realm, for the laity, you build up that Christian social order, and then you produce, good men, good women.
I would definitely underscore that, because those good men and women really don't need much formation then when they get to the seminary. It should just be deepening that formation they already started in the domestic church. Well, thank you so much for joining us for the download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules filii Hevae. A te suspiramus gementes et flentes, in hoc lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos, ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende, O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for the download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time from all of us here at Church Militant. God bless you.